Hey guys, it's Christian, and today I want to talk about Microsoft Azure. I know many people will now say, "Oh Christian, what the hell, why should we care about Microsoft as a public cloud provider when we have a home lab?" Hold on, in this video I'm addressing exactly this question, plus I will give you a brief introduction to Microsoft Azure and some of the amazing free services they provide. Because honestly, I'm very excited about learning Microsoft Azure right now, and if you are interested in IT and tech, you probably should be too. So let's find out why. Look, I'm most likely not telling you anything new when I'm saying Microsoft Azure is such an important player in the professional IT industry. It's, besides AWS and Google, one of the three leading cloud platforms in the Magic Quadrant named by Gartner, and 95% of the Fortune 500 companies in the world trust Azure with their business every single day. But I want to tell you a more personal story, yeah? Because as you might know, my background is more in the home lab and self-hosting space. However, I'm also working in a cybersecurity company where in the last months I've been heavily involved into some really cool DevOps and automation projects. And one of the key technologies that we were using in those projects was, surprise, Microsoft Azure. And if you know nothing, or maybe just a little about Microsoft Azure, like myself, I can definitely tell you that even setting up a simple shared storage can be quite a heavy challenge if you do it the first time. Now, that all got me thinking about, if I really would like to learn this because I need it for work, I should probably use it in my home lab too. And to my surprise, once I started to look into it, I realized that Microsoft has added some really interesting features on their platform to support this type of workflow. So not just putting everything into their cloud, but combine the best of some valuable cloud services with cost-efficient plans and on-premise infrastructure. Besides that, they also have tons and tons of free services like free credits, free trainings. I'm, for example, planning to do some really exciting projects with Azure next year, but I thought I want to give you a good introduction to Microsoft Azure right now before I do that. And not to forget it, of course, a big thanks goes out to Microsoft for supporting this video and making it all possible. To easily get started with Microsoft Azure, just head over to their official homepage azure.microsoft.com and click on one of the buttons to create a free account, like Try Azure for free. And as you can see, they offer you some really interesting services that are free for 12 months, and they even give you $200 of Azure credits to easily get started within the first 30 days. Now you just need to click on Start Free and sign in with your Microsoft account, and then you need to complete the setup. So select your country and region, add your address information and so on. You also need to fill in credit card information, but don't worry, this is mainly just for identification. They won't automatically charge you once the trial period ends, so you still need to confirm this if you want to continue with their pay-as-you-go service. And once you completed the sign-up process, it should take you to a screen like this. This is the Azure Web UI, where you can create and manage all your cloud resources. And the very first thing that you should always do is go into the settings menu and change your appearance settings to dark mode, because we all love dark mode, yeah? And you can also, of course, select any other options for the Web UI that feels right to you. You can also change and customize most of all these different windows here, add specific reports to the dashboard, create your own dashboards for viewing certain types of things, but we don't want to do that right now because Microsoft Azure has so many different things. It has so many different types of resources, buttons, options, and yeah, I know it can feel quite overwhelming when you see it the first time and you actually don't really know where to start. But don't worry, this is why we have this tutorial here, all right? Before we start creating our first cloud resources on Microsoft Azure, let's also talk about some of the free stuff they provide. Because I know you all love free stuff, and yeah, I do too, so let's talk about it. Besides the $200 of free credits that you can use in 30 days for, by the way, any type of resource you like, there are essentially two different groups of free services in Microsoft Azure. The first one is probably the more exciting stuff, which is free for your first 12 months being on Microsoft Azure. So once you start creating your Azure account, it starts counting. While some other ones are always free, which are mostly management services, but also sometimes useful stuff like Azure Functions, web applications, or databases. If you want to create a virtual machine with either Windows or Linux operating system, you have 750 hours for free on one of those different plans. By the way, we later talk about pricing and sizing of those different plans, so what the hell means B1S, B2, PTS, who knows that, yeah? But these are mostly really valuable plans to create free virtual machines on Microsoft Azure, which is great. And you also got Azure SQL databases, which is always free. So, of course, with some limitations, yeah, on the performance and storage capacity. Also, Cosmos DB, Azure App Services is always free. And also Azure Functions with 1 million requests. Absolutely amazing. Because one thing that might be a bit different on Microsoft Azure than on any traditional hosting or smaller cloud provider is that nearly everything in Microsoft Azure requires a different type of resource. For example, we already covered you got like virtual machines for Linux or Windows, 750 hours for free within the 12 months, 64 gigabytes of SSD storage here, so that perfectly aligns to the resources you're gonna need for creating virtual machines. But also other things like public IP addresses or security plans, those type of resources can produce additional costs. So you really should carefully check what type of resources are free on Microsoft Azure and what others might produce costs. If you want to learn more about all those different types of Azure resources, I can just recommend go to the Microsoft Learning Center. So there you will find so many different types of resources like videos, training courses, documentation. They even got virtual events like the Microsoft Virtual Training Days, where you sometimes get an Azure certification completely for free with a video course. I once did a video about the Microsoft AZ900 certification. I think it's probably already like 2 or 3 years old, but you can still watch it. I will link you that in the description. There I took the AZ900 exam and I shared some of the tips for you that might help you to go through it. But there you will learn so many fundamental skills about Microsoft Azure, about the different types of resources. So yeah, if you need to learn anything, just look it up. Now let us go back to the web UI of Azure and let me just show you around a bit. So on the left side, you got a menu where you can just go back to your home or your dashboard. What is also useful if you click on all resources, so there you got a list or a table with the different resource type and the resource group and the location. And when you click on all services, you get a huge list of all those different types of resources. And again, you can just click on one of them. For example, if you need virtual machines, just type in virtual machines, click on that, and then you get a table of all the different virtual machines that you have currently deployed. One thing that might be also useful for you is the cost management and billing center. And I just want to show you that at the beginning, because this is one thing that always worried me a bit in Microsoft Azure, because you have all those different types of complex resources, and it's sometimes a bit hard to get an overview of what actually produces costs and what is included in the free plan. The cost center is really amazing for getting a good overview and analyzing the costs. If you go to cost analysis, you get a graph of all the different resources and the costs that they produce. As you can see, there is also a forecast for the end of the month. So you can see that I probably need to pay 12 euros at the end of December for running cloud services on Microsoft Azure. And I can now filter depending on what type of resource is it, what produced the most cost. As you can see, storage is currently the thing that is the most expensive for me. If it would be included in the free plan, you would not see anything here. But also virtual network is creating some costs. Probably there are also some resources depending on public IP addresses. So public IP addresses is a special thing. We will talk about that. But again, if you are ever worried about costs in Microsoft Azure, just go to the cost center, do a cost analysis. You can even set up cost alerts so that you're not over exceeding your budget. That can be very, very useful. And with those two different things, like the free services that they provide and the transparent cost analysis, you should get a good overview of what you actually need to pay. Okay, I know this was a pretty long introduction and I'm sorry for that. I get it, you just want to see me creating some stuff here in Azure. And let's do that, yeah? I want to just show you some of the fundamental stuff that you're probably always going to need when you're creating some stuff on Azure. Like, the first thing that we should cover are resource groups. You can find it in the left menu. Again, if you don't find something, you can always go to all services and just search for it, yeah? For example, type in resource groups and then click on that. That will take you to the resource groups view. Now, if you create any resource on Microsoft Azure, you need to assign it to a resource group. And a resource group is something like a logical container to organize and manage different types of related resources. Usually, you put everything together that shares the same life cycle of typically something that is deployed together or updated together or deleted together. But you're completely free with how many resource groups you create and what you put in those. Yeah, for example, I just put everything in one resource group, but once I start creating or adding more environments like in a different location or production testing environments, then I should separate it in other resource groups. Yeah, you can just create it here with the plus icon, and then you need to select a subscription. And that's the next thing I need to explain. A subscription, that is like a service plan. So if you just signed up on Azure and you are within that trial period, that will be your service plan. But once you switch your account to a pay-as-you-go service plan, you will need a subscription for that. So resources within that same subscription are always charged together. So usually you just will have one. For example, I have one production subscription where my credit card is charged for any type of resource that is created within that subscription. So let us create a resource group demo 1, for example, and then choose a region. Now, Azure has many different regions around the globe. Not all products are available in all regions, and those regions also have different availability zones. For example, in West Germany, we have 3 availability zones, if I'm correct. And you probably can just select a region that is nearby or where you just want to distribute your services. By the way, what's very interesting is this page here. I will link to that in the description down below. So here you will find some of the geographical data centers around the globe, and you can find out more about those regions. For example, Germany West Central is a location in Frankfurt. And of course, you got different types of compliance offerings, products that are available in those regions. You can check out what different types of regions are existing. As you can see, Europe are 2 data centers. One is in Ireland, one in Netherlands. And you can choose whatever fits your requirements. Back to Azure UI, let's click on Next, and then you can also select tags here. For example, if you want to give it a tag like production environment or whatever. I'm usually not doing this because I'm the only one who is managing it. But if you have a team with 20, 30 people, you probably want to give tags to the different types of resources. Azure is always validating if the information that you entered is correct. When you're creating more complex resources, it might take a bit longer to validate and create those things here. For example, this is our new resource group demo 1. And now we can start creating some resources and assign it to this resource group. Let's, for example, first create a new SSH key, because we're going to need that to authenticate to our virtual machine that we create here in a minute. So let's go back to all services and let's search for SSH keys. Click on that and then create a new SSH key. By the way, you can also go to all resources here and click on create. This is an alternative view where you can also search for different types of resources here and also discover some other stuff here like third-party apps. And yeah, there's a huge marketplace for so many different things here, but we're just gonna need SSH key for now. So let's select this and click on create. Now, again, we always need to select a subscription here, even though SSH keys are usually not charged as far as I know. And we also need to select our resource group. I always need that even for production, so I'm just going to select this resource group. You can still use SSH keys on servers that are located in a different resource group, so don't worry about that. I will just give it the name set SSH. And no, I don't want to generate a new pair. I want to upload my existing public key. Okay, that's fine. Let's just go to review and create this SSH key. And here we go. Now we have our SSH key created. The next thing that we're gonna need is a virtual network to assign a local IP address. Let's again go to all services and search for virtual networks. Click on that, and as you can see, I already created a production virtual network. Now, I probably want to create another one because the production one is managed by the production resource group, and because we have created a new resource group, we should also create a demo network for our demo virtual machines here. Give it a name like net demo 1, for example. Select the region where I want to deploy this. Next, you can also set up some security information like adding Azure Firewall, DDoS protection. You need to be careful because some of these options here might be paid services that are not included within the free ones. So don't select anything that you don't understand here. Go to next. So here we can set up IP addresses. Yeah, you can add an IPv4 address space or an IPv6 address space. So I'm just gonna create 192.168.0.0 with a subnet mask of 24. So we got 256 IP addresses for virtual machines. And of course, I also need to change this default address range here because we changed the subnet. So you can click on edit, or you can just delete it and add a new subnet. And the subnet address space should be starting with 192.168.0.0 and goes up to the subnet size of 24. So the whole network, basically. Let's just add this. Now we have this entry here. And let's go to next. I don't want to give it a tag, so let's just straight go to review and create. And now some resources take some time to deploy. Yeah, you can always get a notification in the top corner here, so you can track the progress of how long it takes or what is happening with your deployments. If something does not work, you will also get an error in here and you can troubleshoot and detect what's going wrong. But as you can see, our deployment was successful and we now got a virtual network created in our resource group, so that's fine. Okay, so I think we got everything that we need for creating a new virtual machine in Microsoft Azure. So let's go again back to all services and let's just search for virtual machines. So let's click on that. And that takes us to the virtual machines view. As you can see, I already deployed one for evaluation and testing stuff. It's currently stopped and deallocated. We also talk about what that actually means. So let's create a new one here and select Azure Virtual Machines. And now we can start fill in the information. So, of course, we need to select a resource group, and I'm just picking the resource group demo 1 and give this new virtual machine a name. I'm just calling it SLV. I actually don't know what was the last number that I've created, 6 or 7. I really don't know. I probably should come up with a better naming convention. So let me just call it temp for temporary 1. And now again, we can select in which region or in which data center we want to create this virtual machine. Now, what is very special about Microsoft Azure and any other big cloud provider that is probably not common on smaller ones is that you don't just get so many different regions where you can create resources, you also got availability zones, separate physical data centers. So that means like in Germany West Central, we have 3 availability zones, and I could now decide I want to create this virtual machine not in one data center, but I want to create it in 2 or maybe all 3 of them. And when one data center goes down, so whatever crisis would happen, I don't know, a meteor or what could crash the whole data center, but then I still got 2 other data centers in Germany that could start a new process for my virtual machine. That's a pretty great feature if you think about it, but usually if you're just doing a test, you don't need that. So select the availability zone, no infrastructure redundancy required. Then you don't need to mess around with this. And then, of course, we need to select an image. So here you can select from different types of operating systems and Linux distribution. No, these are, of course, not all images. If you click on see all images, you get a huge list in the marketplace with over 7,000 results of virtual machine images, and you can probably find everything in here. You can even upload your own custom images, which is a feature that you also don't always get with other hosting or cloud providers. So Microsoft Azure gives you a huge amount of options here. I just prefer most of the time just deploying Ubuntu servers. I just like this Linux distribution a lot. So I'm just selecting Ubuntu 22.04 LTS in the latest generation. Now, you need to select a size. So how many resources do you want to give to that virtual machine? And as you can see, it automatically selected the standard size of DS1 V2. I don't know if that's still the default if you're within the 12 months of trial period. But as you can see, this deploys a resource with 1 CPU core and 2.5 gigabytes of memory, which would cost $48 a month. In that list, you can select different types of sizing. Again, these are just the recommended stuff. If you want to see all sizings, again, you get a huge list of over 600 different types of VM sizings, depending on how many products are available within your data center region. And you can add filters to find the specific combination of memory, CPU, and data disk that you need. You could also select no grouping, so then you get a huge list of all the different things and you can filter it. For example, you could order it based on the cost per month, and as you can see, this is the cheapest machine that you can provision, the B1LS. And this comes with 1 CPU core and 0.5 gigabytes of memory, which is not a lot. So you probably want to go at least with 1 gigabytes of memory. So as you can see, this is the B1S. And this is one of the free services eligible plans. So if you remember, in the pricing table, there were a few selections that are free within the 12 months for 750 hours. So this is one of those plans that is free. After the 12 months, it costs you $8.76. But again, you can go bigger depending on how much CPUs and memory you're gonna need. So for example, I'm most of the time just picking the DS1 V2 or D2S V3, depending on if I need 8 gigabytes of memory and 2 CPU cores, or just 1 CPU core and 3.5 gigabytes of memory. And as you can see, those pricings, they can add up, yeah, quite a lot. I mean, if you want to deploy a server like this here with 2 CPU cores and 8 gigabytes of memory, that would cost $83 a month. So, and that can seem a lot. Now, one thing I probably should address at this point here is the pricing, yeah, because often people say Microsoft Azure is too expensive, which is definitely a topic that is often misunderstood. If you just compare the pure pay-as-you-go prices with dedicated virtual machines of traditional hosting providers or maybe smaller cloud vendors like Linode or DigitalOcean, yes, it may appear expensive. However, it is not a fair comparison in my opinion. First, Azure's pricing is similar to other major cloud providers like AWS and GCP. And second, if you consider traditional hosting providers or smaller cloud vendors for running your servers, fine, so be it. But you have to keep in mind, they of course don't offer you the same features and options like Azure. They are not even close to that. However, if you're not interested in those advanced features like geo-redundancy and so on, and you're just looking to run a couple of virtual machines to host your website or testing stuff, the question might still come up. So why choose Azure if the pricing is so much higher than on other hosting providers? Well, one thing you have to understand is that cloud machines are not always used in the same way as a vServer or a dedicated instance. Because Azure offers you the advantage of creating and provisioning new cloud resources within just seconds. And you only pay for each allocated resource per hour. So if you only run your virtual machine for a few hours or a day for testing purposes and you deallocate it afterwards, the pricing model actually becomes more cost effective than paying a fixed price per month for a dedicated machine that runs 24/7. And what most people don't know, in addition to the default pay-as-you-go pricing, what we've seen in the table, Azure also provides 2 other pricing options where they give you huge amount of discounts. The first are the reserved plans. So if you already know that you're going to need a server for a longer duration, so maybe to host a website or whatever type of service you want to deliver, you can purchase a 1-year or 3-year reserved plan. Azure often gives you between 50 and 60% discount on a 3 years plan, which can be a huge difference, and a great option for business critical operations that you want to commit to on a longer time period. And the next option would be Azure Spot. So this will bring the cost down even further, up to 90% of discount sometimes, which is crazy if you think about it. But the big difference between a reserved plan and Azure Spot is that this is only an option for non-business critical workloads. Azure only gives you that huge amount of discount when they have more resources available than customers are actually using. So that basically means you can use some of their unused resources in their data centers without any problems. But if for whatever reason one of their pay-as-you-go customers decides to provision a couple of thousand new virtual machines a day, and they should fall short on resources, they might deallocate your Azure Spot instance to provide their committed SLAs. So never use it for business critical stuff, but for testing or simple home lab experiments, Azure Spot is always my way to go. So if you go back to the Create a Virtual Machine window and select Run with Azure Spot discount, it gives you a couple of more options. Like you can choose the eviction policy, so that means what happens when Azure would need to deallocate your machine. Should it delete it or should it just stop and deallocate the resources until they are free again? So I would always choose that here, otherwise it might happen that your Azure virtual machine gets deleted and you never know why. And then you could go to see all sizes, and now you got a slightly different table in here. So let's again just select no grouping. And we added the filter Azure Spot Supported. So now when we go to the right side, and yeah, we can, let's select the display cost to monthly so we can easier compare it. And now let's try to find the DS1 V2. Without Azure Spot, this did cost $48. So now it costs $4.90. And the 2 CPU cores and 8 gigabytes machine that did cost around like $80, $90, now costs $8.40 per month. So this is a huge discount. As I can see, this is 90% cheaper. And also the eviction rate is pretty low. So the chance that Azure might deallocate your machine because it needs it for other customers is pretty low on those plans. You can see all those different plans have different eviction rates. For example, I would never really choose that one here because it has a 20% plus eviction rate. So just have a look at the table, see what you need, and where you think you get the most value of it. Again, for testing and home lab experiments, I always just use those Azure Spot instance. So I'm just going to select the D2SV3. So we got a machine with 2 cores and 8 gigabytes of memory. Let's select this one. And now we can select how we want to authenticate to that machine with an SSH public key or password. Again, we just created it, so I'm just going to select my username in here and use one of the existing keys stored in Azure. So now we can select our SSH key that we've created in the beginning. Now you can also select if you want to allow incoming ports to be forwarded to the virtual machine. Again, we need SSH to authenticate from outside, but you could also add HTTP or HTTPS if you're hosting websites or any other thing that you can, of course, also customize here. So let's select next. And then you also need a disk for this virtual machine. Again, depending on what type of disk service plan, if you want to use a premium SSD or a standard SSD, this again costs a different amount of money. If you need a zone redundant storage, so if the data is replicated to all 3 availability zones of the region, then you would need to select one of those plans. But for our testing, I think it's just fine to use a standard SSD that is locally redundant just within that data center. And of course, I want to delete it with the VM. If you don't select this and you delete your VM, your disk is still existing. It might produce cost. But everything else seems fine, so let's just go to networking. And here we just want to select our virtual network that we've created and select our subnet 192.168.0.0. And you can also select here if you want to create a new public IP address. So again, public IP address produced costs. And as far as I know, the public IP addresses here are not included in the 12 months. So this is one thing you need to take care of, especially if you create more than one virtual machine and you create one public IP address for each of those virtual machines. It will also add up to the cost. So that's why I decided to not do it this way, but I use a public IP address that I assign to a load balancer, and this load balancer forwards different types of ports to my internal virtual machine. So with that trick, you can even bring the cost down further because you don't need a separate public IP address for every virtual machine. You can just use a load balancer and assign one public IP address and forward it to multiple servers. That's also possible. Maybe I do a separate video about this, but yeah, for now, let's just create a new temporary public IP address. So of course I want to allow incoming ports 22 for SSH connection. Again, here I could select other ports and customize it. And I want to select this here, delete public IP when the VM is deleted. Same with the disk. Okay, that's fine. Let's go to management. And yeah, this is just, I leave it by default. You can set up if you want to automatically shut it down. So this can be pretty useful if you want to use that for testing stuff, but you forget to shut the machine down, because if you deallocate a machine, it will not produce cost anymore. So sometimes I set up a specific plan every night to automatically shut down all the machines that I don't need if I, for whatever reason, forget it. But yeah, I don't do it right now. And let's go to monitoring. So again, all of this stuff, diagnostics, alert, and those kind of things, I leave it by default. Let's go to advanced. Here you could add some cloud init data if you want to automatically provision this machine with specific settings like users, Linux packages, whatever you want to do. I'm not going to need that right now. And also the tags I don't need. So let's go to review and create this. Okay, so the deployment is now in progress. It shouldn't really take long to provision a new virtual machine on Microsoft Azure. And once this is done, we try to authenticate and see what we got. Okay, so our resource is now deployed. We can just go to the resource and manage it if we want to change something. You can also look up the public IP address in here, so we can just copy this, open a terminal and SSH into that machine. And now we are logged in. So that just took I think that took below 1 minute. I mean, besides the whole creation stuff and so on, but just the pure provisioning just took a few seconds. So this is really, really fast. And you can do anything with that virtual machine that you want, like install Docker, run a couple of services, experiment, do whatever you just like to do with it. But I want to show you one thing at the end of this tutorial, because I think this could be pretty useful. Because you can manage all of this stuff here in the Azure Web UI, like see all the virtual machines and do things like that. But I sometimes just prefer a terminal. Yeah, for example, if I want to stop or deallocate a machine or see what virtual machines are currently running and so forth. So I sometimes just love to do it in a terminal. And Azure provides you a command line interface that is called the Azure CLI that you can install on your local workstation. Like on this article, I will link you that in the description. So there you can find a tutorial how to install it on Windows, on macOS, or on Linux. You can even run it in a Docker container or in Azure's Cloud Shell. So Cloud Shell is when you go to the web UI and click on that small button over here, it will open a Cloud Shell in your web browser. But yeah, I don't like web browsers for running command line interfaces. So if you want to install that on macOS, just install it with one simple command and then you got it. Once you install that, you can open it with an AZ command. So that should give you a description of all the different options here. The very first thing that you need to do is, of course, securely authenticate. So type in AZ login. So this will take you to a web browser where you need to sign up with your Azure account. And then you are automatically authenticated. With an AZ account show, you can always display the detailed information about your Azure account and subscription. And for example, if you want to display all the virtual machines within your Azure account, you can type in AZ and then VM list. And it will give you a huge JSON object that is sometimes a bit hard to read. So what you should definitely do is type in AZ VM list and select the output as a table. You just enter table, it will give you a simple list of those virtual machines. You can also add a -d parameter if you want to get more information about this. It takes a bit longer, but it also shows you the public IP addresses and if the virtual machine is currently up and running or if it is deallocated. Again, like this first virtual machine is currently running. This is where we just logged in and what we've created. If we want to stop this machine, you can type in azvm stop and then you need to enter the name like srv temp1 and the resource group res demo 1. Well, let's stop this, for example. So this will now power off the virtual machine in Microsoft Azure. Stopping the virtual machine will still continue billing. So you really need to deallocate a VM to reduce the cost. So there you just need to use the azvm deallocate command with the same parameters, and then you are fine. Okay, so that was completed. Let's go to the UI. And let's refresh the window. So there you can see it automatically reported the status stopped. And I could now, from a web UI, just start it or use the command start in Azure CLI. And yeah, just like that, you can create and play around with Microsoft Azure, use some of their free services that are always free, like Azure Functions, web apps, or within the 12 months, create a test virtual machine to just play around with it and familiarize yourself with Microsoft Azure. It's gonna be worth it. Okay, so that's it about my introduction to Microsoft Azure. I know, we barely scratched the surface and there are so many other cool and exciting features we could explore. I think I just need to familiarize myself a bit more with Azure, experiment a bit, and go through the trainings and the documentation. By the way, please tell me if that's a topic you'd like to learn more about and which specific things you'd be interested in, so leave a comment below. And of course, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to watch more videos and tutorials about nerdy tech and home lab stuff. Thanks everybody for watching, enjoy the rest of your day, and because that is the last video of this year, I wish you all the best and I will catch you in 2024. So take care everyone, bye bye.